Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Comfort Ride system here on our 2015 Keystone Raptor fifth wheel toy hauler. So our neighbor came to us today because he is going to be taking a cross-country tour with his camper here and hitting up a bunch of different campsites along the way, and wants to make sure that he has the best and most comfortable ride quality when he is doing that. And that is exactly what the Comfort Ride is going to give to you, because it's going to be separating your two axles. Now, when it comes to your typical tandem axle setup, it's going to be forcing that load back and forth across your equalizer to whichever axle as you start to go over a bump in the road or something. Maybe you're running up on a curb or something like that. It's going to be pushing it over to that other axle and putting a lot more of a load on that. And then also, you got a lot of road shock that typically just comes up from your wheels into your suspension and then travels up the frame, and then you're feeling that in your truck. So what this does is it separates our two axles so that we don't have one forcing pressure onto the other, because now we have a slipper spring box where the slipper spring end is sitting inside of that box, and there's room in there for it to move back and forth. Along with that, we added in some shocks, which are going to help with all of that road shock that's coming in. Now we're going to dampen that all right down here, so that way we're not feeling it up in our truck as we're driving around. Now, before you purchase your Comfort Ride system, there are a few things you're going to want to check first to make sure that you're getting the correct kit for your specific trailer. Now, the one we have today is designed to fit axles up to, axles from 5,200 pounds all the way up to 7,000 pounds. So if you have a 5,200 pound, 6,000 pound, or 7,000 pound axle, this would be the right kit for you. To figure out if that is going to be the right fit, you're going to want to get under your trailer and look for that axle tag. It's going to be a white sticker that's typically on the back of the axle. So if you get down there, that'll have a clear indication of what the capacity is, and then it also has some other information. So there's your serial number on there that can be used to look up all of the info from the build sheet when they originally made your axles, and then you could also figure out exactly what kind of bearings and seals that you actually use. So if you were replacing those as well. Now typically when I'm doing this, anything else suspension-wise, it's a good time to do it because you're already taking all of this stuff apart. It's really easy to just swap out all of your components that are kind of starting to wear right here and now. Along with that, you're also going to want to make sure that you check out your U-bolts, because a majority of the time when we have these come in for this install, there's not enough threads on there to fit that extra plate that's going to hold on our shocks. So that's typically about 3/8 of an inch. So if you don't have at least that amount of room for that plate to sit on there and then still get the nut on and torqued down, then you're going to want to order some new U-bolts, which you can pick up here as well. And like I said, in most cases, I am always swapping these out. I don't feel like I've ever really had one where I could just keep it. It's typically just enough room to get that nut on with maybe 2 or 3 threads sticking out in most cases. The other thing that we've noticed on mostly newer trailers is they've been adding in support brackets that are at a 45-degree angle, and it's coming off of the center hanger, and that's blocking the slipper spring box from actually bolting up into place because it's sitting out too far. If you have that issue, you're going to want to contact a Roadmaster beforehand and see if there's going to be enough clearance for that to actually fit. If it's not going to fit, in some cases they have stated that you can kind of trim that down a bit, but at the same time that kind of takes away a little bit from the safety of it. Even though the slipper spring box is getting bolted to the frame, I would just confirm with Roadmaster for your specific setup to make sure that it's okay. So with all that said, once you do actually have all of your equipment and you're ready to begin the install, you are going to need some space to actually lift the trailer up, because you're going to want to lift it up by the frame so that way you actually have some room to work. You're going to want some jack stands, probably some bottle jacks as well. That way you can raise and lower the axles as you're doing this, because you're going to have to kind of have a little bit of room for them to drop, get all your suspension components out of the way, swapped over, and then have that bottle jack to kind of help lift the axle back up so you can get everything lined up properly and get your bolts through. One thing our neighbor did on this one was he swapped over to some wet bolts on the shoulder hangers, so I would recommend doing that as well. But if you're going to do that, you're also going to want to pick up some bronze bushings, because the nylon bushings that are already pressed into your slipper springs here are not going to be compatible. As soon as you start putting that grease in there and letting it do its job, it's going to start eating up that bushing and it's going to wear out a whole lot quicker. So if you are wanting to do that, make sure that you're getting the correct components to go along with it. As far as installation goes, this is easier for me because I've done a bunch of these, but it can be a bit daunting. It's a lot of heavy duty stuff here. You got to lift the trailer up, A lot of the stuff you probably are not going to have at home, or you're probably not going to have the space at home to actually do this install. So if that is the case for you, then please feel free to use our dealer locator, and you can enter in your zip code to find a shop near you to get it professionally installed. If you are going to be doing this yourself, then stick around and I'll walk you through the process. So starting off our install, we're going to be doing both the Comfort Ride and some disc brakes. So I'm going to be removing everything here. We won't go through all of it just because it's not totally needed for the Comfort Ride install here, but I'm going to be removing my hub and drum assembly and getting those fully off, so it's just going to be down to our spindle on our axle here. And then you're going to see we have our suspension. That's where the Comfort Ride is going to come into play, and we'll start removing all of that piece by piece so that we can get the new setup in there. Now, one thing that is a little bit different about this one is that this trailer comes with the correct track, which is this guy right here. So essentially, behind this block right here in the hanger, there's going to be a slot that runs across, and as you turn that hexagon, that's going to kind of change your alignment of your axles. Now, this is just set at the standard setup, so it's not like there's anything that's extra special here that we're going to have to do. It's really just that that's going to have to go back on, so any bolts that we use to replace, which our neighbors wanting to switch over to wet bolts, are going to have to be the correct length to match up with that wider bracket now. So if you are doing that, just double check and make sure that you have the correct bolts before you get in here, get all the parts, and then realize you're going to end up too short. So with all that said, I'm going to start breaking down my hub and drum assembly here. So as part of this prep, we're going to want to use some jack stands, maybe some bottle jacks too, under your axles, and that's going to allow you to help support them, because once we start taking the suspension down, there's going to be nothing to actually hold it up. So we want to make sure that we have something there to catch it. We don't want that dropping down on us, and we're going to need the bottle jack more so just to lift it back up, so that way when we put on the new slipper springs and get our U-bolts on, we have a way to kind of adjust and get everything sitting correctly. So now it's time to disassemble our suspension here. Now you can take just these 3 hanger bolts out and drop the whole thing. You'll still have to remove your U-bolts here. I don't feel like lifting all that right now, and it's pretty dirty, so I'm going to try to not get it all over myself. So I'm going to pop out each hanger bolt, but I'm also going to do the shackle straps too. That'll separate my leaf spring from my Equalizer and just make it a little bit lighter. Now on the nut side, I'm using an 11/16 socket, and then on the bolt side, I got a 13/16 wrench. And we don't want these to spin. That's why we're using this on here, because on the hanger ones, these have knurls in the bolt, and that actually bites into the metal, and we don't want that to spin out, because then it's going to be too loose and it'll allow wiggle room. And any wiggle room you have that's not part of the intended design here is going to cause some kind of component failure. Each one of these is going to stick. There we go. Now for the hanger bolt, we will have to hammer it out, and you might even potentially need to use a punch just to get it fully out, because a lot of the time it likes to stick inside of here, and then when you're hammering out, you might get a little bit of the way, and then it'll stick again, and then just hitting with that punch on the back helps force it out the rest of the way. I'm going to see if we can get it without though. There we go. And this is what I was talking about with these bolts. You can see the little splines right there. So with that out of the way, now we can move on and do our shoulders here. Now, like I said, with this being a correct track, I am going to have to pop out that bracket off the bolt here, and we're going to be reusing these brackets to keep that same length. The wet bolts I picked out to go and replace our standard shoulder bolts here are going to be the correct length to go along with these correct track brackets. I'm going to be removing my nuts on my U-bolts. next we're gonna hold our slipper spring box up to our center hanger. The thing with this is there was 2 bolts in my way that help hold up this underbody panel, and then also we had some spray foam in the way. I kind of ripped out as much as I could of that to give us enough clearance here, and I took out those 2 screws. Next we'll be cutting out a section of our underbody panel so that this can sit sandwiched up against the frame. And to do so, I was hoping I could get my bolt in, but it doesn't look like that's going to be an option with how low this sits. So I'm going to center that up so that the hole in our hanger is matching up with the slot that's in our box. And then we're just going to take our paint marker and go around it. Oh, here, recenter now. There we go. And then we're just going to cut that out. All right, now we're gonna take our paint marker. There's 4 holes that we're gonna need to drill, and we'll have self-tapping screws we're gonna run through. Now, what I like to do is get the whole slot here all painted up. That way I know how much room I have to work with, because also, a lot of the time this is an I-beam, so you really don't wanna drill into the center of it. You wanna get it out on the flange. So once we have that all marked up, we'll then come back with our center punch. And one thing I do like to try to do is, on this one it's really fighting me, where it's wanting to kind of draw the box crooked. So I'm gonna keep that in mind and really try to hold this as we tighten it down with those self-tapping screws once we get those in. But the big thing here is we're gonna start out real small. We'll do a center punch into the frame so that we have a little nub to go into and our bit won't walk. And then I'll start out with an 1/8 inch bit, and then we're gonna work our way all the way up to 21/64. And that is what's gonna run through, and then we'll shoot our self-tappers through, and then we can move on to the next step here. But now that that is marked out, I'm gonna pop the bolt back out and drop our slipper spring box. And we have our holes all marked for us. So like I said, I'm gonna be skipping. I've got a pack of drill bits here, and we're gonna go every other size up until we get to that 21/64, just to make it a whole lot quicker to drill through, and then we're not wearing out a bit prematurely here. So now is the part where we would take our self-tapping screws, that's these guys with a little cut in them, and we would mount up our slipper spring box. You're going to want to use some blue Loctite on these first before you shoot them up in there. And one thing I like to do is typically when I'm installing this, I'm going to also be doing the shock kit with it. And the shock kit comes with a whole bunch of them. So in your normal kit, you're only going to have 8 for just the Comfort Ride slipper spring box. So I'm going to be using some of the ones out of the shock kit just because I am going to be bolting up to this. I'm not using the brackets. So a lot of these are going to go to waste. So what I'm doing is I'm going to shoot it up in there. That's going to cut the threads and get this to the right size. And typically when you do that, that kind of eats up the threads on these. So instead of having my new ones be all chewed up, I'm going to have just one of them get chewed up by shooting it in and pulling it back out and then going to each one of the holes here. Then we can mount it up, and the new ones are going to shoot right up in there, nice and easy. The big thing here is I've had some of these break off on me. So like the head will snap off and then you're sitting there re-drilling the hole out. So it's a whole lot easier to use the sacrificial one first and just get all these cut to exactly what you need before you go and you actually torque down the ones that we put in our box here. So I'm gonna run these up and down and then we'll get our box mounted. So now that we're ready to mount up our slipper spring box, I have my hardware ready. I've got one of the 9/16 bolts, a flat washer, one of the shorter spacers that matches up with this, because that's going to sit on the inside of our box. And then to finish it off, we have a lock nut. So I'm going to get this slid up into place. We'll get our bolts started. I'm not going to get it all the way through yet because I got to get my spacer inside first. And then we can finish that off with that lock nut. And we'll leave that loose for right now. We're not going to fully tighten that down just yet, because now we're going to shoot those self-tapping screws into place. Like I was saying earlier, if the box is wanting to kind of turn on you, make sure that you got it kind of held in place so you can have it straight, because we want this to line up perfectly with our leaf springs. And as I'm doing this, I'm only going until the head of our self-tapping screws are touching, and we'll torque it down the rest of the way with our torque wrench. All right, now that we have it mounted, I've popped the nut back off that center bolt, and now we can add on that washer. And if we really wanted to, we could also fully tighten it down. I'm gonna wait just a bit because we have 4 other bolts we're gonna do. So on these lower ones that we have shooting across, that's gonna be our thinner bolts here, the silver ones. We're gonna have a spacer that's gonna go in between our slipper spring box, and then there's gonna be a nut. Now we're gonna be doing bolts on the outside facing in with the nuts on the inside. So what we'll do is just get this all lined up. Get our bolt through, and this one right here is what the bottom of our leaf spring is going to rest on. And then above it, we're gonna have another one of those 9/16 gold bolts along with one of these guys right here. So they changed the design on this a little bit. It used to be just this tube with a flat piece on it, but now they've added these side brackets to it, these little hexagons. And that's gonna essentially sit inside, and then the leaf spring sack's gonna butt up against that, and then on the bottom it's got the other one. So it's got nowhere to go. So it'll have room to move around back and forth and kind of up and down just a tad, so that way you still have that separation between the 2 axles, but it's not going to be enough to where that slipper spring can pop back out and be loose. So I'm gonna wait to push this one in just for right now, because we're gonna get our leaf spring in place first, and then we'll slide that through, because we wouldn't be able to get it in otherwise. Sit just like so. Well, there is one thing I'm remembering I need to do now. Since we are switching over to wet bolts, I am gonna pop out the bushing that is on our eyelet on our leaf spring real quick before I get it in place here, but just to give you a visual of how this is gonna look. You can just ride that right up it to get it lined up, lift it up, pop your bolt through, and throw the nut on the back, and that would be good to go. But I'm gonna pop this out, like I said, and push out that nylon bushing so we can switch over to a bronze one. So if you've never replaced a bushing before, pretty good to just grab any kind of older bolt. So this one isn't a grease zerk fitting on it, so it's easier to hammer onto. And then you can use that to hammer the bushing in without having to worry about damaging it. And then our new bolt will slide right on in. All right, so I got my bushing swapped over. Now we'll reinstall our little catch here. And then on the other side, on the shoulder bolt over here. I will have to lower our jack here just to drop the axle enough to get that to line back up properly. But on this side, we will be reusing our correct track components, because otherwise we have this big slot right here that wouldn't be enough to grip with the bolt, and then we'd have a lot of movement here, and then you run the risk of things getting damaged. So we'll need to make sure that we put this in the same exact orientation it was in originally, and then we can run our new wet bolt through it. Now that we're through, I'm going to put the nut on the back, and I might have to use that to help crank this into position here. But I'm going to keep that nice and snug, and we're going to use a socket. So I've got a 9/16 socket I use to just kind of hammer on any bolt that has a grease zerk fitting, because I can use that to fit around the fitting and just hammer on the socket instead, so that way I'm getting it on the outside of the bolt, not damaging that fitting. We'll press this fully in, and you may have to stop and kind of crank down on the nut side a little bit more, but just kind of depends on how easily it wants to pop into place for you. All right, so now that I have that pressed in, I took the nut back off because we're going to put some red Loctite on the threads first, and then we can tighten it back down, but we're only going to tighten it to where it's just kind of pinched on here, but we want to still be able to move our axle or our leaf spring freely. It needs to be able to just kind of slide back and forth, because we are going to have our suspension compressing and decompressing here. All right, so that's tight enough there. I still have a little bit of movement there, even though I'm blocked over on this side. So now that that's in place, we're just going to repeat the same process over on the other side here. So now that I have our other leaf spring in place, we can tighten and torque down all of our hardware on the slipper spring box. For the smaller bolts, we're going to be using a 5/8 socket and wrench. Snug these down real fast. And then on the larger bolts, we're going to be using a 13/16 socket on the bolt head side, wrench, and then a 7/8 socket on the nut side here. So now that we have this all torqued down, all ready to go, now we can switch over and get our U-bolts in place along with our tie plates for our shocks. Now with these, the mounting flange is going to need to be facing inward towards the center of our slipper spring box here. So the orientation you have these does matter. So that one will go there. Now, most of the time you can get away with just reusing your U-bolts. Most of the cases I've found, there's not enough threads sticking up through the tie plate for this bracket to also fit on there as well. So typically we end up swapping it out for a kit, just like I have right here, that has some longer threads on it, so that way we can get everything sandwiched all together real nice. But with all that said, let's show you how this goes. So I'm going to slide up my inner U-bolt here. We're going to put our Comfort Ride plate on, and the center is going to have a hole in it that's going to match up with the little bolt that's in the center of our spring stack. Get that on. Then I'll stick on our tie plate. I'm going to throw on a nut here just to help hold it while I get the other one in place too. And I'm just running this down until it touches. But I don't want to go too tight or anything like that, because I don't want it starting to pull. Sometimes this will want to fight you. There we go. Now I'm going to snug these down just a bit more, but I want to make sure that I'm doing it evenly. So I want the same amount of threads on each one of these as I go. Alright, now we can switch over to our torque wrench. And for those of you at home, if you do end up getting this specific Dexter kit, we are using a 3/4 inch socket. So I like to get these up to like 30 just to start with, and I'll kind of crisscross as I'm doing this. And then I'll switch back and forth every 10 or so foot-pounds, just so I make sure I'm getting this nice and even. Now we got that side done, we're just gonna do the same thing over here. So now it's time to install our shock mount extensions, and you can see on this there's 4 holes, but the 3 right here are spaced a little bit closer to each other than these are right here. This one is going to be the one that we put all the way down at the bottom, and that's going to be for our shock, and it's going to go between this hole and this hole here up in our slipper spring box. Now, the holes up here are going to differ on which one you're going to want to use depending on whether your leaf spring is sitting above or below your axle. With the leaf springs being above our axle, we're going to want to use the top 2 holes. Now, if this was below, we would switch that over to the middle holes here. And for the hardware, we're going to be using our 1/2 inch. Now, I grabbed the M12 because a lot of people will mix up the 2 nuts here. The 1/2 inch will thread onto the M12, but it won't work vice versa, and it's not going to be a tight fit. So just make sure that you're grabbing the right hardware. If you look at it, the 1/2 inch is a lot larger than the M12. So just a quick way to differentiate that. But what we'll do is hold up our bracket, get our bolt in place, get a nut on that. And if you don't want to fight the other nut while tightening it down, you could go ahead and do it now, but then you'd also have to make sure that you're holding this perfectly so that way you don't have the bracket come off at a weird angle and then you can't get your bolt in the next time. I'm just going to throw it in because there's enough space here. I can still get my wrench on without having to really fight it. Get that on, and then we're going to be using a 3/4 inch socket and wrench to tighten these down. And we can torque them. And now we can move on to actually mounting up our shocks. All right, I'm going to start with the top here just because it's a little bit easier to kind of work it over from the top versus the bottom. And starting off, we're going to have our M12 bolt in a flat washer. Once that slots through, we'll have another flat washer and then a spacer block. So this guy, one of these. Then we're going to have one of these triangle spacers, and these are going to give us that angle that we need so that we can match up with that bottom bracket. And when this is in, we want to make sure that we have the fat side facing down towards the bottom of our shock here. And then on the inside, we're going to have another one of these, and it's going to be the exact opposite where the skinny side is facing down towards the bottom of our shock. What I like to do though is just snug it down to where it's almost all the way tight, and then from there, that's when we'll start to mess with it a little bit more. Usually I'll use like a flathead screwdriver and just kind of force it over. Sometimes you got to loosen it up a little bit more and really play with it while you get it tightened down as well. So it's a lot to kind of hold all at once. But let's get our other triangle spacer in on the inside, flat washer, and then one of our M12 lock nuts. And we're just going to get a couple threads on that. Now on the extension, we're going to be doing the bolt head coming in towards the inside of our trailer. We'll throw a flat washer on there first. We'll have that sit through there. Then we'll have a spacer, a flat washer, our shock. So we'll have to kind of pull that back a bit, get that lined up. And you may have to compress your shock just a tiny bit to fully get it to line up. And we'll finish that off with another flat washer and our M12 lock nut. So at this point, here's where I'd start snugging it down, and then, like I said, getting it to that 95%. And then typically what I do is, because you got to kind of hold both sides, plus have a wrench on there and a socket so that you can tighten it all down. I'll get it real snug. And then typically I'll take like a flathead screwdriver and just kind of force it over until it's at the right angle. Now we can torque it down to spec too. And then last thing is to just cut off this band here. And then we can do the same thing over on the other side here. Now, if you aren't getting the slipper spring bracket, this is where you'd be doing it with just the little brackets that would mount up to the side here. That way is a bit more challenging just because you do have to figure out the right angle. I do like with the slipper spring box, you already have the hole there, you have the bracket here, so it makes it super simple to just have it go exactly how it needs to. And there's no math or trying to figure anything out here. So now that we have this side all complete, we're just gonna hop over to the other side and get that done in the exact same way we did on this side. Now one thing I run into typically when I do one side and then the other is sometimes the axle will drop on you on the opposite side. So like if I was working on this side first and then going over there, with the trailer being lifted up, the weight on that side, especially with the wheels on, is gonna drop. And then you'll see like your shackle straps will drop down. Instead of being into that V shape, they'll kind of split down. And if you're seeing that and you're having issues getting your axle back up on the side you're working on, just go to that other side, lift that back up. You may need to stick a pry bar kind of just down in between the shackles and pry it up as you are jacking it up. And that'll make it a whole lot easier, because what happens is the axle kind of gets twisted while you're working on it here because it's off balance, and that can throw it off and make it a little bit more challenging while you're trying to swap everything over. But well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the Roadmaster Comfort Ride Suspension Enhancement System here on our 2015 Keystone Raptor fifth wheel toy hauler. My name's Kevin. And if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension upgrade for your trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.